Linen fabric depicting the outline of the human figure has captivated the Christian world for 2 millennia. Many believe it to be the last garment of Christ, a belief that has led to wars and bloodshed throughout history. This cloth is thought by some to be the linen in which Christ's body was wrapped after being taken down from the cross at Golgotha. Conversely, others argue that it represents yet another manipulation by the Church to maintain the believer's blind adherence to its doctrines. Thus, let us embark on a quest to uncover the truth behind Christ's last garment. Our story begins in 1st century Israel, during a time when an extraordinary event unfolded, one that would alter the course of history. What transpired was remarkable. Within just a few centuries, the occupying forces began to embrace the beliefs of those they had subdued. The crucifixion of Christ represented a pivotal turning point in Western civilization, which was significantly shaped by the Roman Empire and Hellenic culture. While crucifixion itself was not an unusual form of execution, subsequent events had a deep and lasting impact on the development of civilization. We find an account of this in the Holy Scriptures, Luke 23:50. Now behold, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. He had not consented to their decision and deed. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one had ever lain before. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. Additionally, in John 24, we read this: "So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself." In both accounts, reference is made to the cloth in which Christ was wrapped after his death. The biblical narrative regarding the shroud ends there. Yet, just as Christ himself held immense significance for his followers, the linen shroud was also regarded with profound reverence. According to legend, the shroud was entrusted to the apostle Simon, known as Peter, in Jerusalem, until its possession became too risky due to the threats from Roman persecutors. The biblical text indicates that there were 2 shrouds, one that enveloped the entire body and another that covered the head. Eusebius of Caesarea, a distinguished historian often referred to as the father of church history, presents an intriguing narrative in the 4th century regarding the shroud, which he claims eventually arrived in the ancient city of Edessa. At that time, Edessa was governed by King Abgar V, also known as Ukama, a pivotal figure in the city's early acceptance of Christianity. This vibrant city, deeply influenced by devoted followers of Christ, was significantly impacted by the teachings of Thaddeus of Edessa, one of the 70 disciples mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. The local populace was receptive to the new faith, which gained traction through the remarkable miracles and transformations they witnessed. King Ukama himself experienced a miraculous healing, reportedly through the words of Christ, and this profound event prompted him to invite Christ to come to Edessa and make it his dwelling place. Here is the text of King Ukama's letter to Christ himself. Abgar, ruler of Edessa, to Jesus, the good physician who has appeared in the country of Jerusalem, greeting. I have heard the reports of you and of your cures, as performed by you without medicines or herbs. For it is said that you make the blind to see and the lame to walk, that you cleanse lepers and cast out impure spirits and demons, and that you heal those afflicted with lingering disease and raise the dead. And, having heard all these things concerning you, I have concluded that one of two things must be true. Either you are God, and, having come down from heaven, you do these things, or else you, who does these things, are the Son of God. I have therefore written to you to ask you if you would take the trouble to come to me and heal all the ill which I suffer. For I have heard that the Jews are murmuring against you and are plotting to injure you. But I have a very small, yet noble city, which is great enough for us both. Eusebius notes that the shroud was carefully preserved in the Grand Royal Palace, serving as a symbol of reverence for the rapidly growing Christian community. He further claims that his historical account relies on the original letters written by King Ukama, which were meticulously archived in the royal records and inscribed in the ancient Syriac script. These documents provide invaluable insights into the early connections between Edessa and the teachings of Christ. Following the reign of King Abgar V, and amid a period of turmoil, the shroud was concealed within the city walls. Procopius of Caesarea notes that the royal palace sustained damage due to the flooding of the Dyson River, a tributary of the Euphrates. During the reconstruction of the palace, the shroud was rediscovered, though it had incurred minor damage that left a noticeable mark on the fabric. Another mention of the Shroud of Edessa, later known as Urfa, can be found in the writings of Evagrius Scholasticus in 593. He recounts that the shroud played a miraculous role in defending the city from a Persian assault in 544 AD. However, following Edessa's capture by the Persian Empire during the Sassanid period in 609, the shroud was no longer displayed publicly. A new empire was rising on the horizon, Romea. Initially known as the Eastern Roman Empire, it transformed into the center of modern civilization under the rule of Constantine the Great, who was born in Naissus, present-day Nish. With this change, the city of Rome was swiftly eclipsed by Constantinople. Situated along the shores of the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, Constantinople would become the capital of many empires for centuries. It was a city coveted by Christian emperors, the Orthodox successors following the Great Schism, and later by Muslim sultans who would besiege it centuries later. Romea was the longest-lasting empire in recorded history, enduring from 330 AD, when the construction of Constantinople began, until its fall to Ottoman rule in 1453. In total, Romea persisted for an uninterrupted 1,123 years, marked by both triumphs and tribulations. The splendor of this city is reflected in its numerous monuments from that time. However, one structure that stands out for its grandeur and historical significance is the Column of Constantine. This pillar continues to dominate one of Istanbul's squares, having been erected at the beginning of the 4th century alongside the founding of the city itself.
We are in Istanbul, also historically known as Stambol, Tsarigrad, and Constantinople. How has this city been named throughout various periods of history? We are currently standing before one of the formidable walls that encompass the entirety of the city. This fortification is known as the Theodosian Wall, named after the emperor who completed its construction. According to the inscription behind us, this gate marks the entry point of the conquerors who entered the city on 29th of May 1453, led by Sultan Mehmed II. In the year 330, Emperor Constantine decided to establish a city on this site along the shores of the Bosphorus. This location, where the small village of Byzantium once stood, was strategically ideal as it bridged Europe and Asia. From ancient times, it served as a critical crossroads. Even the Persian king Xerxes constructed a bridge over the Hellespont during his campaign against Hellas, as documented in Herodotus's Histories. Constantine aspired to build a city that would surpass all others within the empire, including Rome, which at that time was the capital and the largest city in the known world. It is astonishing to contemplate that Istanbul has since evolved into a metropolis of 20 million inhabitants. The architectural design of fortified cities like Constantinople was characteristic of that era. Most such cities were protected by double walls. In this case, the wall in front of us is accompanied by a trench, while the primary defensive wall lies behind us. This form of construction can be observed in several other historical locations. The design and extent of these walls, spanning approximately 6 kilometers, rendered them virtually impregnable for much of the Ottoman siege. They posed the greatest challenge to the conquerors during their prolonged attempts to capture the city, which stood as the final bastion of the Roman Empire. Had it not been for betrayal, one might question whether the conquest in 1453 would have occurred at all. What is less commonly known, and often omitted from historical narratives, is the fact that the Byzantine Empire, referred to by Western historians since the Middle Ages as Byzantium, was the longest-lasting empire in human history. From its foundation in 330 by Constantine, who was born in Niš, Serbia, to its fall in 1453, the Byzantine Empire endured for 1,123 years, experiencing both periods of prosperity and decline. This account is based on officially recognized history corroborated by archaeological evidence, excluding speculative claims about other civilizations with unverifiable longevity or chronology. Due to its significance, technological advancements, pioneering universities, and economic prosperity, Byzantium became a coveted prize for Western powers. At that time, Western nations were relatively impoverished and undeveloped, prompting many Western merchants to settle in Constantinople and establish their own districts. The city served as a central hub for trade, attracting goods from Asia, Africa, and Europe. However, Constantinople suffered its greatest devastation not during the conquest of 1453, but during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. This campaign, originally intended for the Holy Land, culminated instead in the sack of Constantinople. Following the looting and burning of the city in 1204, it never fully recovered, managing to survive only for another 250 years. Even Serbian Tsar Dušan launched a military campaign against Byzantium, seizing significant territories from it. Of particular relevance to the story of Christ's shroud is that in 1204 the relic disappeared from Constantinople. The Shroud of Christ was among numerous relics that vanished during this time, remaining lost for the subsequent 150 years. The Crusaders were divided into two factions: the Venetians, who sought wealth in the form of gold and treasures, and the Frankish knights, who were primarily interested in acquiring sacred relics. At the time, Constantinople reportedly held approximately 50 tons of gold reserves, while most Western nations possessed only around 2 tons each. This stark disparity underscores the immense wealth of Byzantium compared to the West. Many of the relics looted during 1204 can still be found in churches and monasteries across France and Western Europe. The Venetians, enriched by this plunder, emerged as the wealthiest state in Europe and subsequently developed a predatory and monopolistic banking system, aspects of which persist to this day. Even now, visitors to Venice can observe the famous quadriga, the the chariot with 4 horses which was taken from Constantinople. Lastly, 1204 marks the final recorded sighting of Christ's shroud in Constantinople.
The establishment of Christianity as the official religion of the empire marked a pivotal moment in history, as emperors began to collect a multitude of revered objects and relics. Among these remarkable achievements, the relocation of a colossal obelisk from Luxor, Egypt, to the Hippodrome in Constantinople stands out as a testament to their ambition, involving a daunting journey of about 3,000 kilometers. Yet, for Christian rulers, the most coveted relics were those directly linked to Christ himself. Beyond the valuable fragments of the Holy Cross and the nails used in his crucifixion, which had already been brought to Constantinople, the Shroud of Edessa emerged as the most significant relic of all. Under the visionary leadership of Romanos I Lecapenus, Edessa was conquered in August 944, allowing the precious canvas to be transported to the empire's capital as an unparalleled trophy. In Constantinople, the shroud found its home in 2 prominent locations. One such site was the atmospheric church on Pharos, or the lighthouse, nestled within the imperial palace and in close proximity to the Hippodrome, though this historic site no longer stands today. The significance of these relics cannot be overstated, as they represented the divine connection and authority of the Christian faith within the empire. And the second location was the church on Vlahana, which has been preserved to this day and is located within the Theodosius Wall.
We are in front of the church on Vlahana. The church of Anna Maria Vlahana is the oldest in Istanbul, dating back to the year 450, when it was called Constantinople. This church was one of the oldest Christian places of worship until the Great Schism of 1054, after which it became an Orthodox church. This church is significant for the story of Christ's shroud, as it was here that the linen cloth was kept during its time in Constantinople. As the city became the center of the empire and Christianity was established as the official religion, the rulers could not allow relics associated with Christ to remain in the provinces. At that time, there were 2 sacred fabrics related to Christ. One was located in Camuliana, Cappadocia, and the other was a canvas from Edessa. Both of these relics were acquired through military campaigns and brought to the capital of the empire. Camuliana was conquered in 574, and the first shroud was brought to Constantinople. In 974, a Byzantine army led by General Romanos I Lecapenus conquered Edessa and brought the shroud, or Sindoni as it was called, to the city. The shroud was placed in this church behind me, or in the Church of Pharos, which was part of the royal palace of Constantinople.
When the shroud was in Constantinople, it was regularly displayed and carried out in processions through the city streets. Robert de Clary, a knight of the Fourth Crusade, which ended in the sack of Constantinople, wrote that the canvas was displayed every Friday and that it was raised. This was later interpreted to mean that the cloth was actually folded in a box, which was attached to a kind of easel, and thus the cloth was lifted, symbolizing the resurrection of Christ.
We are in the area where the Hippodrome of Constantinople used to be. It was a masterpiece of architecture of its time. The fact that the Hippodrome in Constantinople was 3 times larger than the Colosseum in Rome tells us about the power of the Byzantine Empire at that time. It was a place where sports competitions were held, and the highlight of it all was horse racing. In Greek, hippo means horse, and dromos means road, so hippodrome means way for horses. Today, hippodromes are places where big derbies are held and where a lot of money is spent on bets. That was probably the case in the old days. Just as there are Formula One or NASCAR races today, the Hippodrome was once a place where people brought their horses from all over the world to win the most exciting race of their time and to adorn themselves with laurel leaves. Behind us are 2 obelisks. One of them was brought from Luxor, Egypt, which is over 3,000 kilometers away. How this transportation was accomplished, we can only imagine. This obelisk occupies a central place in the Hippodrome itself. The entire city of Constantinople was enclosed by a wall, the construction of which was completed by the Emperor Theodosius. When it was completed, this wall was 12 meters high and 6 meters wide and stretched over an area of 6 kilometers. Legend has it that they could turn their horse-drawn cart on the wall without touching it. There was also the famous imperial salary where the emperors reigned. Next to the palace there was a lighthouse, or pharos as it is said in Greek. Next to pharos was the Church of the Virgin Mary. It was one of the biggest sights of the city. The church on Vlaherna was the second place where the Shroud of Christ was kept. Here, too, cloth was displayed every Friday, as he testified in his letters to Robert de Clary. Constantinople was the spiritual center of the empire. That is why all the sacred objects in the empire were brought here. Just as the Byzantine army came to the relics in military campaigns and looting, so fate played a game, and in the same way in the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople itself was sacked. The Bible says, "He who draws the sword will die by the sword." Thus the story of the Shroud of Christ ended its episode in Constantinople.
For 150 years, nothing was known about the shroud. The fate of the canvas was shrouded in mystery. There were many legends, but no one knew where the shroud was really located. Until 1353, all trace of the canvas was lost. And then it appears in the possession of Geoffrey de Charny, son of Jean de Charny, a prominent knight from Burgundy and a good friend of the Frankish king Louis IX. Like his father, Geoffrey took part in all the Crusades. Especially was written the one on Smyrna in 1344. The canvas was kept in a small church in the city of Lirey, near the city of Troyes. Amid a lot of disagreement over where the canvas should stand, the bishop of the city of Troyes, Henri de Poitiers, declared the canvas a forgery, and even accused one painter of being guilty of forgery. Under increasing pressure from the Catholic Church in 1453, Margaret de Charnay, the heiress of the family, handed over the canvas to the House of Savoy, arguably the most powerful European royal family of the time. The price for the canvas was the Castle Varaman in France and the annual maintenance of the armoury in Lirey. If we know that at that time there was no Italy as a state, nor France in its present form, nor Germany as we know it today, the area ruled by the Savoy family was one of the largest and certainly the richest in Europe at that time. From central France, through the Mediterranean and the city of Nice, the Alpine regions of France and Switzerland, all the way to the present-day Italian province of Piedmont with Torino, it belonged to the House of Savoy. After taking over the canvas, the Savoy family places him in their then capital, in the city of Chambéry, in the heart of the Alps, hidden from the reach of all enemies. The canvas is placed in the local church, which is located in the basement of the royal castle.
Our journey and the quest for the Shroud of Christ have brought us to the small alpine town of Chambéry, situated in the far south of France. For an extended period, Chambéry served as the capital of the Duchy of Savoy. The House of Savoy governed a vast expanse of Europe, spanning from the Alps to the Mediterranean Sea. This influential dynasty, which traces its origins back to the 10th century, was among the most powerful noble families in Europe. In 1453, the House of Savoy acquired possession of the Shroud of Christ, also referred to as the Sindone, or, as it is more commonly known today, the Shroud of Turin. The acquisition involved the payment of a castle, as well as the annual upkeep of the armoury at Lirey, to the heirs of Margaret de Charnay's family. The castle located here, along with the chapel in which the shroud was housed, holds exceptional significance in the history of the relic. It was in Chambéry that the shroud was publicly displayed for the first time since its presence in Constantinople. To commemorate this event, printed invitations were issued, some of which have been preserved to this day. Chambéry was also the site of a devastating fire in 1532, during which the roof of the chapel collapsed, causing severe damage to the shroud. The effects of this fire remain visible on the relic even now. Despite the catastrophic event, the linen fabric miraculously survived the ordeal. Subsequently, in 1578, the House of Savoy relocated the shroud to Turin, which had become the new centre of the duchy and would soon serve as the capital of the Savoy kingdom. As a result, the town of Chambéry became a significant waypoint in the journey of Christ's shroud, tracing its path from Jerusalem to its current location in Turin.
In 1578, the shroud was transferred to Turin, which had by then become the capital of the kingdom of the House of Savoy. It was placed in a chapel specifically constructed to house the Shroud of Christ, situated adjacent to the city's cathedral and the royal palace. This period also marked the zenith of the House of Savoy's power. The grandeur and wealth of the royal family are embodied in this magnificent structure, which features artworks by some of the most renowned artists in history. Several of these masterpieces were specially commissioned for the royal palace. The collection of artworks now displayed to museum visitors holds an incalculable value.
At the conclusion of our quest for the Shroud of Christ, we arrived in Turin at the chapel of the Sacra Sindone, or the Chapel of the Shroud of Christ, where the linen cloth remains to this day. We stand before the complex comprising the royal palace, the city's cathedral, and the chapel itself. This entire architectural ensemble was commissioned by Duke Emmanuel I of Savoy. The construction of the chapel began in 1668 and was completed in 1694. Before this, in Turin, the shroud was kept in the Church of the Holy Shroud, which has since been transformed into the Museum of the Holy Shroud. Upon the chapel's completion, it became the permanent home of the shroud, where it remains housed to this day. The immense significance of the shroud to the House of Savoy is evident from the construction of such an imposing edifice dedicated solely to its preservation. In 1997, a catastrophic fire engulfed the chapel, once again threatening the destruction of the linen cloth. Remarkably, the shroud survived this disaster with minimal damage and has been preserved in this condition to the present day. Given the accumulated damage and the passage of time, the Shroud of Christ is now displayed to the public only on select occasions. with these dates being announced in advance to accommodate the immense global interest. Following the restoration of the chapel, it was reopened to the public in 2018, resuming its original purpose.
The most invaluable treasure within the entire art collection is the Shroud of Christ. In the chapel where the shroud is housed today, statues of the most prominent members of the House of Savoy are also present. It appears as though they intended to immortalize their earthly existence, positioning themselves as eternal guardians of Christ's shroud within the sacred space. The chapel itself, through its architectural design, the interplay of light, the marble columns, and its profound silence, creates an unparalleled experience for visitors. This atmosphere offers a deeply spiritual impression for the faithful, who journey from across the globe to be near what they believe to be the blood of Christ imprinted upon the shroud.
At the conclusion of our journey, we stand within the chapel of the Sacra Sindone. Positioned behind us is the revered cloth that the majority of Christians believe to be the one in which Christ was wrapped following his crucifixion.
May 25th, 1898. Secundo Pia, a lawyer and amateur photographer, is commissioned to photograph a canvas on the 400th anniversary of the construction of Turin Cathedral. A seemingly simple task with the most modern equipment at the time led to a new stage in the examination of the canvas. Namely, when he was developing the negative in a dark room, the figure of a person wrapped in canvas appeared in front of the secundo. He was petrified when he saw the figure of a person he believed to be Christ himself. This photo has found its place on the front pages of newspapers, both local and national, with a circulation of millions. Very soon, this became a worldwide sensation. This character has forever changed the perception of what is really on the shroud, opening up space for new research and speculation. The character that appeared on the shroud did not look like a character from Da Vinci's The Last Supper, nor a character from Hollywood blockbusters, nor a character that was depicted on the icons of the most famous churches throughout history. The same 2,000-year-old question was asked again: whose character is actually on the canvas? To resolve all uncertainties surrounding the authenticity and age of the shroud, it was deemed essential for modern science to provide its verdict. At the initiative of the Vatican, the STURP project was established, an acronym for the Shroud of Turin Research Project. This initiative commenced in October 1978 and was supported by 3 of the world's leading institutions in radiocarbon dating: the University of Arizona in Tucson, the University of Oxford in England, and the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. The project engaged approximately 100 scientists from a wide range of disciplines who dedicated over 3 years to a comprehensive study of the shroud. It was subjected to An array of advanced scientific analyses, including ultraviolet imaging, biochemical testing, examination of the physical properties of the fabric, archaeological evaluation, and the creation of three-dimensional models. This extensive scientific undertaking aimed to rigorously challenge the authenticity of the shroud, attempting to establish it as a forgery. The initial focus of the research was to identify the pigment used to depict the contours visible on the cloth. However, despite exhaustive testing, no traces of artificial pigments were detected. This result confounded researchers, who had assumed this step would be the simplest means of uncovering a potential forgery. By analyzing the properties and age of any pigments found, they believed it would be straightforward to establish the shroud's chronological origin. Yet, with no evidence of paint or pigment, attention shifted to determining the age of the fabric itself. At the time, radiocarbon dating, carbon-14 analysis, was considered the most reliable scientific method available. In 1981, the final Stirpe project report was published in London. According to this report, the shroud was dated to a period between 1260 and 1390, conclusively situating its origin in the medieval era. This finding appeared to definitively dismiss claims that the shroud was the burial cloth of Christ, as described in the Holy Scriptures. In 1988, the Vatican accepted these scientific conclusions, affirming the results of the carbon-14 analysis. Science has given its final word and debunked a 2,000-year-old legend.
As we have observed, the Stirpe project, conducted by three of the world's foremost institutions in radiocarbon dating, the University of Arizona in Tucson, USA, the University of Oxford in England, and the Zurich Institute of Technology, delivered its final analysis of the Shroud of Christ. The results dated the shroud to a period between 1260 and 1390, attributing its origin to the 13th or 14th century. This conclusion was widely disseminated by global media, presenting the Shroud of Turin as a medieval forgery. You may be wondering, given that the scientific community has seemingly issued its definitive verdict, why we have come to Budapest and what motivated our continued journey. Behind me stands the historic Buda Fortress, an iconic site in Hungary. The first section of the fortress visible behind us houses the National Széchenyi Library, Hungary's preeminent repository of statehood and history. This institution safeguards the nation's oldest documents related to the medieval Hungarian state, as well as numerous other manuscripts amassed during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The medieval Hungarian state took shape at the end of the 9th century under the reign of the Arpad dynasty. The founder of this dynasty was Almos, also known as Saint Stephen. Within the library one can find a document from the 12th century, dating back to the reign of King Bela III of Hungary, known as the Codex Prae, or Prayer Codex. The Codex Prae is the oldest surviving document written in the Hungarian language. This manuscript contains an illustration of remarkable interest. Let us now explore the significance of this image and its implications, particularly concerning the alleged reliability of the carbon-14 dating method used to date the shroud. We are currently at the National Széchenyi Library, situated within the historic Buda Fortress in Budapest. This prestigious institution was established in 1802 by Ferenc Széchenyi, a Hungarian aristocrat, during the late 18th century. The library stands as a cornerstone of Hungarian culture, housing an extensive collection of original documents dating back to the 11th century, written in various languages. Among its treasures are extraordinary rarities such as Mozart's original scores, the writings of Nostradamus, and numerous other significant historical works. Of paramount importance to Hungary is the Codex Prey, a 12th century manuscript commissioned by King Bela III of Hungary between 1192 and 1195. This document is an invaluable artifact that reflects the medieval heritage of the Hungarian kingdom. Additionally, the library preserves a collection of early Gutenberg printed Bibles representing the dawn of movable type printing in Europe. For anyone keen to explore Hungarian history and culture, a visit to this remarkable library in Budapest is an absolute must. We are standing beside one of the most significant manuscripts in both Hungarian and European history. This document is of profound importance to Christian civilization as well. Known as the Codex Prey, it is named after Jesuit priest George Prey, who discovered it in 1770. The Codex is a cornerstone of Hungarian heritage, being the oldest surviving document to feature the Hungarian language and Relic, an ancient language spoken by the Hungarian tribes. It serves as a church collection, prayer book, and historical record, chronicling the legacy of the Árpád dynasty, which established the Hungarian state in the early 10th century. This dynasty played a pivotal role in the Christianization of Hungary. The codex includes liturgical hymns, rites, and genealogies of Hungarian kings. It was commissioned by King Bela III, who ordered his delegation to go to Constantinople and make a note of the Shroud of Christ there between 1192 and 1195. One of the codex's most remarkable features can be found on page 154, where an anonymous artist sketched a funeral ceremony. Although the drawing lacks great artistic merit, it is detailed enough to reveal the author's observations, which included a depiction of the Shroud of Christ in Constantinople. The illustration portrays the linen fabric with details such as the herringbone weave pattern and holes or burn marks, features still visible on the shroud today. Since the method of carbon dating C14 dated the shroud to 1260 to 1390, and since this drawing clearly shows that the shroud was in Constantinople 70 years before that, it is quite clear that this method of dating is as wrong as it has been countless times in the past, and that it cannot really be called scientific. We can say that the Codex Prey has actually exposed this entire dating method. The Codex's original cover was missing when it was discovered, and a replacement was subsequently added. Today, it is preserved under strict environmental conditions to prevent deterioration. It is so highly esteemed that it is personally patroned by Hungarian President Viktor Orbán. The Codex Prey has had a storied journey. After its discovery in 1770, it was housed in Bratislava, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, now the capital of Slovakia. In 1702, upon the founding of the National Széchenyi Library, it became part of the library's collection, where it remains to this day as one of its most treasured artifacts. We are currently in the Museum of the Shroud of Christ, located in Turin. This museum occupies the former church of the Holy Shroud, where the linen cloth was kept before being moved to the chapel of the Holy Shroud in the center of Turin. Behind us is a replica of the shroud, displayed in the location where the original cloth was once housed. This replica serves as a powerful visual representation, providing visitors with a glimpse of the shroud's historical setting. Today, the museum on Via Domenica houses an extensive collection of artifacts related to the shroud. These range from the earliest photographs of the canvas and records of its first public exhibitions to paintings and icons depicting the shroud. Additionally, the museum contains a wealth of scientific papers and materials that have explored this historic artifact. The Shroud of Christ is widely regarded as the most extensively researched artifact in human history. Its enduring mystery has prompted countless scientific studies and investigations, which we will explore in greater detail. For those seeking a deeper understanding of the shroud, this museum offers a comprehensive and meticulously curated display, making it an essential destination for anyone interested in the history and significance of the linen cloth.
The dimensions of the shroud are particularly noteworthy, measuring 8 by 2 cubits, a standard unit of length during the period. Linen fabrics with identical dimensions have been discovered at various archaeological sites in Israel, including a complete example found near Masada. Given the slight variations in the cubit measurement across Egypt, Assyria, and Persia, Ian Dickinson of Canterbury, England, conducted an extensive comparative study. Using archaeological data, he established that the dimensions of the Shroud of Turin align precisely with the measurements of an Assyrian cubit in the ratio of 8:2. The shroud's linen fabric is remarkably thin, with a thickness of just 0.34 millimeters, consisting of 70 to 120 threads per inch. The coloration of the shroud is a brownish hue, which becomes most distinct when viewed in a negative format. This effect was famously discovered by Secondo Pia in 1898, when his groundbreaking photograph revealed the astonishing contrasting details of the image. The complete image of the shroud is found exclusively on the superficial 2 to 3 fibers of the linen, while the layers beneath remain entirely unaffected. This characteristic effectively rules out traditional drawing techniques employed throughout history. It is worth noting that flax fibers are 10 to 20 times thinner than human hair. Kevin Moran, a specialist in microscopic fabric analysis, observed that the shroud's markings appeared as if someone had meticulously removed the first 2 coats of paint with a knife, leaving the underlying layers, comprising around 100 fibers, completely untouched. He remarked that this phenomenon was unparalleled in his professional experience. In paintings from the Middle Ages, changes in shadows and light create varying shades when viewed from different angles. However, no such phenomenon is present on the Shroud of Turin, indicating that the image was likely formed by a direct, top-to-bottom process rather than traditional artistic methods. Dr. Alan Adler, during his X-ray analysis of the shroud, identified tooth imprints visible in the sinus area of the facial image. Furthermore, the absence of auxiliary lines, guidelines commonly used in medieval drawings prior to applying paint further confirms that this image was not produced using conventional artistic techniques. Auxiliary lines, commonly used in medieval artwork to outline sketches before the actual painting process, are entirely absent on the Shroud of Turin. In other words, there is no preliminary sketch on the canvas. The image on the shroud exhibits a perfect anatomical structure, including intricate details even in areas of overlap, such as the arms and legs. During the Middle Ages, artists lacked detailed knowledge of human anatomy, which has led to speculation that the image could have been created by someone with advanced anatomical understanding, such as Leonardo da Vinci. However, a critical observation disproves this theory. At the locations of bleeding, there is no preliminary outline beneath the bloodstains. This indicates that the blood was deposited on the fabric before the body's image was imprinted. Another remarkable feature of the shroud is the absence of side imprints. The image appears only where the fabric was in direct contact with the body, on the front and back, with no markings along the sides. Under ultraviolet light, the bloodstains reveal a serum retraction ring of albumin, a characteristic unique to the blood of a deceased individual. This phenomenon, known as serum separation, was completely unknown until recent centuries, let alone during the Middle Ages. Chemical analyses of the Shroud of Turin revealed that the image was formed through oxidation, dehydration, and conjugation of polysaccharide components in the cellulose of the fabric. While these processes occur naturally as fabric ages, the reactions are significantly more pronounced in the areas where the image appears. In 1977, researchers Jackson and Jumper used a WP8 image analyzer, a cutting-edge device at the time, to create a 3D rendering of the canvas. This analysis confirmed that the image's variations in shading were entirely determined by the degree of contact pressure between the fabric and the body. The closer the contact, the darker the shade, proving that the image was not painted, but was instead the result of an interaction between the cloth and a physical body. Further supporting this conclusion, Professor Garlashelli published a scientific paper in 2002 highlighting the absence of any traces of brushes or other tools used in medieval painting. Such traces, commonly found in all other artwork of the period, are entirely missing from the Shroud of Turin. This lack of evidence for conventional artistic techniques places the shroud in a category entirely its own. Garlashelli's comprehensive study analyzed the properties of the canvas and image coloration, further solidifying the uniqueness of this artifact. The first conclusion drawn from chemical analyses was that the yellow coloration on the shroud did not correspond to any of the iron oxides used in medieval paints. The iron oxide detected on the fabric was found to be 99% pure, with no traces of manganese, nickel or cobalt, all of which were components of artificially produced dyes of the time. Furthermore, the study noted that colors in paintings typically fade or disappear over time, yet this phenomenon is absent on the Shroud of Turin. The durability and consistency of the image remain unexplained. 23rd of January 1967, a London-based professional photographer, Leo Valla, conducted a 3D experiment using photographs of the shroud taken by Giuseppe Enri in 1931. Valla utilized the transflex process of anterior projection, overlaying two positive images of Enri's photographs onto a flat surface using dual projectors. The results were astonishing. A three-dimensional image emerged, revealing incredible facial detail with clarity unprecedented in photographic experiments of the time. The next phase of research on the Shroud of Turin was conducted at the U.S. Air Force Academy by physicists John Jackson and Eric Jumper. They applied advanced technology used in aerial reconnaissance to convert two-dimensional terrain images into three-dimensional models. Using the same technology, they developed a three-dimensional model of the figure imprinted on the shroud, offering unprecedented insights into its depth and structure. In 2005, Dr. Peter Snoes and his team of experts performed a computer analysis of the shroud's three-dimensional figure using holographic techniques. Their work focused on the interplay between light and three-dimensional imaging. Through a series of holographic analyses, they produced images with an extraordinary resolution of 7,000 by 10,000 pixels, further enhancing the details of the figure depicted on the shroud. Meanwhile, Dr. Max Frey, a criminologist and botanist specializing in Mediterranean flora, began a unique study in the field of botany. In 1973, Frey obtained permission to use adhesive tapes to collect samples from the shroud's surface. His analysis revealed traces of pollen, providing botanical evidence that could link the shroud to specific geographical regions. During the extensive research on the Shroud of Turin, multiple analyses were conducted, including the presence of metals, fabric composition, color pigments, and the mineralization of the cloth itself. However, Dr. Max Frey focused his attention on traces of pollen microscopic remnants that can survive for thousands of years and offer critical insights into the geographical locations the shroud might have traveled. By employing adhesive tape to extract samples, Frey successfully isolated 49 distinct pollen types. Among them were traces of plants native to the Jordan Valley in Israel, supporting the hypothesis of the shroud's presence in the Holy Land. Additionally, pollen indicative of steppe vegetation, characteristic of the region around Edessa in Turkey, was identified. In 1978, Frey further identified 8 new pollen traces linked to regions such as the Negev Desert in southern Israel, the Dead Sea, and Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. These findings align with historical accounts, suggesting the shroud's journey through these areas. To understand the significance of pollen in such studies, it is helpful to reference the pioneering work of Leonard von Post, a Swedish scientist who founded the field of palynology, the study of pollen. He noted that various plant species generate vast amounts of pollen, with conifers producing as many as 100 billion grains. This prolific production ensures the widespread distribution of pollen, which, when preserved in artifacts, provides a critical tool for tracing historical and geographical contexts. The outer membrane of pollen, known as exin, is an incredibly resilient structure capable of enduring for thousands to millions of years. Each species of plant produces pollen grains with consistent shapes, but within subspecies, subtle distinguishing features are present. This makes pollen identification a precise and invaluable tool for tracing historical artifacts like the Shroud of Turin. Most wind-dispersed pollen can travel distances of up to 30 kilometers, but its exin's resistance to chemical and environmental reactions ensures its preservation over vast periods. During Dr. Max Frey's research, he observed that the pollen grains on the shroud were not adhered with external paint or tempera, as would be the case if they were artificially applied. Instead, the pollen was naturally embedded in the fibers of the cloth. Frey advanced his work by collaborating with the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, a leading institution for botanical analysis. Under the leadership of Dr. Benjamin Stone, an expert team analyzed the samples and identified 275 distinct pollen traces. This comprehensive study confirmed the presence of various plant species linked to regions historically associated with the shroud's journey. One particularly intriguing discovery was the pollen of a thorny bush known as Euphorbia millii, commonly referred to as the crown of thorns plant. This plant is native to the Middle East and is traditionally associated with the thorny crown placed on Christ's head during his crucifixion. The presence of its pollen on the shroud adds another layer of historical and symbolic significance to this artifact. The blood test on the Shroud of Turin revealed that the blood type present is AB, one of the rarest blood groups found in less than 5% of the global population. Interestingly, this blood type is often associated with relics of religious and historical significance. Some researchers suggest that AB blood could be the oldest blood type, as its characteristics allow for a reduction of antigens that might have given rise to other blood types over time. This perspective challenges the evolutionary model proposed by Darwinism, aligning instead with observations in nature where genetic information is lost rather than new traits being acquired. In northern Spain, another significant relic, the Sudario de Oviedo, offers compelling connections to the Shroud of Turin. The sudarium, believed to be the facial cloth mentioned in the Gospels, was used to cover Christ's face after his crucifixion. Its authenticity and historical journey will be explored in greater depth in a separate discussion. For this context, the most striking revelation is that the blood type on the Sudario matches that of the Shroud of Turin, AB. This consistency strongly supports the claim that both relics covered the same individual. Modern forensic analysis requires a minimum of 15 points of correlation to establish that two fabrics were in contact or related. The Shroud of Turin and the Sudario of Oviedo exceed this standard significantly, with over 30 points of agreement. This forensic evidence strengthens the hypothesis that these two relics share a direct and historical connection. This evidence suggests that, even if the Shroud of Turin and the Sudarium of Oviedo were forgeries, they must have covered the same individual, as forensic standards confirm over 30 points of agreement between the two fabrics. In today's courts, such findings would constitute valid evidence of a connection between the relics. The WAXS dating study, Dr. Liberato De Caro, from Italy's Institute of Crystallography of the National Research Council in Bari, conducted a groundbreaking study utilizing the wide-angle X-ray scattering wax-S method. This advanced technique measures the natural aging of flax cellulose and calculates the time since the material's manufacture. Non-destructive. Unlike radiocarbon dating, WAXS does not damage the sample, preserving the integrity of priceless artifacts. Only a minuscule portion of cloth is required for analysis, approximately 0.5 mm by 1 mm, making the method particularly appealing for studying fragile relics. The technique has been tested on historical textiles spanning a wide timeframe, from 3000 BC to 2000 AD, and has provided reliable age estimates. This methodology offers significant improvements over radiocarbon dating. Dr. De Caro's research is pivotal in reaffirming the authenticity and historical significance of the shroud by providing a more reliable and non-invasive method of dating. He placed the Shroud of Turin against these samples and found that it best matched a piece of fabric known to have come from the siege of Masada, Israel, in 55 to 74 AD. For the hundreds of scientific expertise that have been done on the Shroud of Turin, we could talk for days without mentioning them all, because behind each experiment there are extensive studies by teams of scientists. The Shroud of Turin is the most examined artifact in history. That's why we ask you in the end, who do you think is on the Shroud of Turin?